just give it a bit of a lead time. People are joining slowly the room. In the meantime, I'll start a small introduction. Thank you everyone who was able to join us today. I'm not going to speak for very long. I'm just going to introduce the main idea behind today's webinar and then pass the floor to Ora. After Biden administration waived congressively mandated sanctions on Nord Stream, the company behind Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and the future of European gas transit and the European implications for Ukraine, as the bilateral relations for US remain uncertain. So today's webinar is hosted for a reason. Together with leading voices in Ukrainian energy and geopolitics, we want to understand the direction in which the US-Ukraine relationship will develop in the upcoming months and how to mitigate the impact of these developments and turn them into strengths for the Ukrainian energy transition. This is my main idea behind the webinar. So I'm going to invite Ora, the moderator of the panel, to make her welcoming remarks before we dive into today's discussion. Just one housekeeping note: if you have any questions to the panel or a particular speaker, please submit them in the right-hand side in the chat function. There's a Q&A button, and we will go through them at the end of the webinar in the Q&A session. So without any further ado, Ora, I invite you to take over.
Thank you, Vadim, and thank you very much for organizing this very timely discussion. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aura Sabadus, and I'm a senior journalist with ICIS, a London-based news and data publisher. Thank you for joining this discussion on Nord Stream 2, possibly one of the most divisive topics holding the agendas of politicians, policymakers, the whole energy industry, and academics on both sides of the Atlantic. Since it was announced exactly 6 years ago, it has attracted widespread criticism, with many observers pointing out that it would divide the European Union, cement Russia's grip over Eastern European gas markets, and undermine Ukraine's security, as the historical Russian natural gas transit through this country would be diverted to Nord Stream 2. As Russia's Gazprom started construction on the two parallel subsea pipelines, which will travel some 2.5 kilometers east from Russia to Greifswald on the German coast of the Baltic Sea, criticism solidified into action. In the EU, the European Parliament voted no less than 4 times against it, the last time being in April 2021. In the US, stopping Nord Stream 2 received bipartisan support, with Congress imposing sanctions on its pipeline activities, which were later extended to service activities under the National Defense Authorization Act of 2020 and 2021. And yet, despite the strong opposition on both sides of the Atlantic and the threat of sanctions, Nord Stream 2, with its 2 parallel pipelines, which could transport 55 billion cubic meters annually of gas, are now less than 100 kilometers away from completion. Supporters have hastened to point out that Nord Stream 2 will bring additional gas to Europe at a time when the fuel is badly needed in order to make a successful transition from coal to renewable forms of generation. Opponents, on the other hand, have dismantled those claims, noting that Nord Stream 2, rather than bringing more gas to Europe, would simply reroute existing volumes which had been transited by Ukraine to this new project. This has already been the case with 2 other corridors spearheaded by Gazprom, one being Nord Stream 1, whose route Nord Stream 2 will now mirror, and TurkStream, which was completed in January 2020, and which will in fact reroute the gas that was transited via the Trans-Balkan line across Ukraine, and it will be now rerouted. It's now rerouted via Turkey and the Black Sea. Nord Stream 2, opponents would point out, would not even supply Western Europe, despite claims the volumes would be needed to compensate falling indigenous production. More than 3/4 of Nord Stream 2 gas would in fact be shipped to Central Europe via the EUGAL pipeline, which has been recently commissioned and would connect with Nord Stream 2. Critics have insisted the rerouting of gas flows via Nord Stream 2 would magnify the divisions between Western and Eastern European countries which have historically struggled to create liquid competitive markets similar to those in Western European hubs. More importantly, the biggest risk would be borne by Ukraine, whose security has depended on the safe transit of gas from Russia to Europe. In the absence of this transit corridor, Ukraine would become irrelevant to the EU and more vulnerable to Russian aggression. It is not surprising that in this context, Kiev has counted on Washington to block the pipeline, and Ukraine's ability to sign a 5-year transit deal with Gazprom in 2019 was arguably facilitated by the introduction of US sanctions, which has since halted progress on Nord Stream 2. However, President Biden's recent decision to waive sanctions against Nord Stream AG, the company behind Nord Stream 2, and its CEO, has effectively sent an encouragement signal to Moscow, with Putin announcing the pipeline's completion this year. Although the technical completion of Nord Stream 2 will bring to an end pipelaying activities, it will not put an end to questions about risks and implications for transatlantic relations. Firstly, who exactly will certify Nord Stream 2? In order to receive certification, Nord Stream 2 has to prove that it would not put at risk the security of supply in Europe. Can Nord Stream AG, a company 100% owned by Russia's Gazprom, prove that its shareholder has not created supply disruptions in Europe? As we speak, the Ukrainian gas transmission system operator GTSO has complained that Gazprom was blackmailing Europe by not booking sufficient transit capacity and thus contributing to record prices in Europe and possibly globally. The goal, they say, is to force Europe to approve Nord Stream 2. Secondly, to what extent will Nord Stream comply with EU amendments to the gas directive adopted to the gas directive in 2019? This would mean unbundling the pipeline from operations from the actual energy company, providing third-party access, introducing transparent tariffs. We know that Gazprom has not been a keen supporter of these principles. Finally, does Nord Stream 2 provide a tantalizing glimpse into how political alliances will be shaping up in the longer term? Nord Stream 2 has already brought a latent division between supporting Western countries, primarily Germany and France, and the opposing East into bold relief. This line may further deepen as Berlin and Paris are clearly minded to seek a rapprochement with Moscow. The US has recently described Nord Stream 2 as a bad idea for Europe and European security. Why then has the US administration changed its mind and decided to waive sanctions against Nord Stream? Observers have noted that the US had to make the difficult choice of accepting Nord Stream 2 in order to secure Germany's support and ultimately Russia's in a possible doomsday confrontation with China. But where does all this leave Ukraine and its Eastern European neighbors? Is it possible that the countries that have put their faith and hope in US support would be once again relegated to the Russian sphere of influence reminiscent of Yalta 1945? These are absolutely huge, almost existential questions, and we have 80 minutes to address them. And with me to discuss these views from Berlin, Kiev, and Washington are 4 exceptional speakers. Dr. Andreas Umland, Research Fellow at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary Advisor to the Ministry of Energy of Ukraine, Mrs. Lana Zerkal, Mrs. Olga Bielkova, Director of Government and International Affairs at the Ukrainian Gas Transmission System Operator, and I'm honored to say Ambassador John Herbst, former US Ambassador to Ukraine and Director of the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center. I've tried to put the whole Nord Stream saga in context, but of course there is much more to say. And I'm sure that many companies and many people in Ukraine will probably be asking, is Nord Stream 2 really a done deal? And I would invite Lana, if possible, to give us a quick update on what's the situation right now. We've seen that a panel in the House of Representatives has renewed calls for sanctions to be imposed. And if you could, Lana, tell us what's the situation and going forward, especially in the light of the certification issue that is looming now. If you could unmute yourself, please, Lana.
Sorry. Thank you, Laura. You gave such an extensive presentation concerning the state of play with the Nord Stream 2 that it's not an easy task to add something, but you're definitely right that this is for us an existential question. The existential question for the Ukrainian as a state. First of all, from the security point of view, we know exactly how Russia can blackmail and threaten not only Ukraine, but the whole Europe. And definitely the situation we have now with the supply of gas through Ukraine to Europe shows us that Gazprom really relies on the completion of Nord Stream 2 till the end of this year. As for your question concerning whether it is done deal or not, they surely think that this is a done deal. And taking into account that in Danish waters, it's only 32 kilometers, which remains unconstructed. And in waters connected to the Germany shore, it's only 16. They think that they will be able to complete all work till autumn. And what is very surprising is that after DNV left the project, the DNV, which is the company who had to certify actually the whole project, Russians did not pay much attention to the necessity to show another company which can certify Nord Stream 2. They did some work with the insurance. They created a new company which insured all works with the Nord Stream 2, but didn't do anything with the necessity to find another company which can certify Nord Stream 2. That worries us, but I do think that it should be more worrying for the Europeans, because definitely certification is a kind of a necessary step in any kind of pipeline completion, and should be one of the obstacles for the operation of Nord Stream 2. But in reality, they don't pay attention to this particular issue. At the same time, in the auctions, which were held on the 5th of July in Europe, in particular in Poland and in Ukraine, Gazprom did not book any capacity for the period 2021-2025. So this means that it relies on the full operational Nord Stream 2 this year. For us, it's a very bad signal, but also I think that this is a very bad signal for the security for the whole Europe. I still hope that Nord Stream 2 is possible to stop, or at least to apply all European rules to its operation. And I do think that it can be relevant not only for the Nord Stream, but the whole Russian supplies to Europe. Because definitely now Russia used gas as a tool for blackmailing, as a tool for threatening not only Ukraine. In Ukraine, we also did not receive any signals from Gazprom concerning their booking requests for the next year, despite the fact that according to the current contract, they had to inform Naftogaz till the end of June concerning their plans for booking and actually the supply for the next year. They didn't do this, even after the reminding. And that also shows that they're not any more interested in Ukrainian gas transportation system. With these current prices in Europe, with maintaining work with Yamal, Russia additionally shows that for them, gas is not just a commodity. They continue to promote their policy of blackmailing. And I really hope that it will somehow create a room for the discussion, what to do with this Russian tool, how to decrease this level of aggression from Russian side, and whether it's possible to create a situation in which Russia will not be able to use gas as a threatening mechanism. That's actually related to the monopoly position of Gazprom in the transportation of gas by pipelines. So if this situation can be changed and Russia will not be able to use gas as they want, and it will be only a commodity, it will mean that Nord Stream 2 will not anymore create the threat, not only for Ukraine, but also for the Central Europe. And I still believe that it's not only in Ukraine we understand this necessity, but also in DC and in Berlin, they think alike and do understand the necessity on the very high political level to raise this issue before Nord Stream 2 will be completed.
Thank you, Lana. Maybe, I mean, your point is absolutely interesting, especially when you mentioned that they had until the end of June to notify Gazprom of any booking of capacity. But do you not think that they may book shorter term capacity, like let's say monthly or daily capacity? So far, they have booked some additional monthly capacity. So do you think that they will just play by the ear, so to speak, and will just book as they see fit?
According to the contract, they do have a possibility to book additional capacities, but this kind of provisions, they limit their ability for maneuver. They had to notify Naftogaz before the end of June concerning their plans for entry-exit points and booking the capacity on this entry-exit point. But they didn't do this. And that's also a kind of sign we just can't leave a site without attention.
So that's very interesting. Ambassador Herbst, of course, the whole discussion now surrounds the issue of waiving sanctions, and what President Biden has recently announced that they would be inclined to waive sanctions against Nord Stream AG and the CEO. What exactly is the view from Washington? How does Washington see this whole Nord Stream saga unfolding? And is the US still committed to Ukraine and to Eastern Europe? And of course, we should put this in the context of the upcoming visits of Chancellor Merkel and President Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, to Washington. What do we expect from these visits?
There's more than one view in Washington on Nord Stream 2. The administration made a very serious strategic error when it decided to waive the sanctions on Nord Stream AG and on Warning, the CEO. I believe that they made that decision because they wanted to restore relations with Germany to the best possible condition, because Trump treated Merkel and Germany very badly. Unfortunately, they gave up a major American interest in doing so. This is a serious problem. And they gave a huge gift to Putin, a huge geopolitical gift. And while the Biden administration doesn't quite realize that, or put it another way, the decision makers in the Biden administration on this, because we know the State Department was against it, they don't understand this. Congress understands this very well, both Democrats and Republicans. And so they are furious about the administration's decision. And I think there's a good chance that the administration will either reverse the decision or be overridden. And here, the various visits you mentioned are part of the equation. Biden came into office, right, in late January, and almost immediately, his administration began to talk to Germany about conditions for waiving sanctions on Nord Stream 2, right? That was 6 months ago. And right now, the administration has received nichivo, bupkis, from Germany. The ideas that are being talked about to compensate Ukraine are very vague help in the green energy sphere. Germany has not put one serious proposal on the table, such as Germany underwriting 10 years of revenues, gas transportation revenues, if in fact the the Ukrainian pipeline goes kaput as a result of Nord Stream 2. Or Germany insisting, and the EU insisting, that Russia observe the third energy covenant of the EU and permit Ukraine to buy Turkmen gas, which has to flow through the Russian pipeline to Ukraine. But Germany's not talking about making any such serious compensation. So Biden made this huge concession to Merkel and has gotten nothing for it. Merkel's coming to Washington to meet the president on July 15. Biden is hoping very much that Merkel comes with a serious offer so he can assuage his critics in Congress. Merkel's got nothing to offer because she's only offering garbage to Ukraine. She has invited Zelensky to Berlin to meet on July 12. She's hoping Zelensky is going to say, yes, I agree to Nord Stream 2. But Zelensky is not an idiot. And unless Germany is offering something serious, Zelensky is going to say no. This is why Zelensky does not have a date to come to Washington. Before the summit in Geneva with Putin, Biden invited Zelensky to Washington in July, right? It's already July 6th. No date has been set. Why is that? Very simple. Biden does not want Zelensky to come to Washington if Nord Stream 2 is still at issue at a time when Congress is in session. Congress is in session in July. So unless Zelensky agrees with Merkel on July 12 that Nord Stream 2 is the greatest thing since sliced bread, he's not going to come to Washington in July because Biden does not want the pressure that Zelensky could help Congress put on him on Nord Stream 2. Because again, Biden has been taken to the cleaners by Merkel. He gave her this great concession and has gotten nothing for it, nothing. So he's very vulnerable. And that's why I think there's still a good chance that either Congress will override the sanctions and the House Foreign State Department bill coming up for the budget for next year, they put in unwaivable sanctions on Nord Stream 2. Now, it doesn't mean that that specific legislation will pass. It can change. But this is one more indication that Congress is dead set against this huge gift to Putin.
That's a very interesting point, Ambassador. But will Biden be minded to accept that he made a mistake in this particular case and maybe go back and reconsider his waiver? Is that a possibility at all in the light of these visits, the upcoming visits?
If the Democratic Senate leadership is as strong in supporting American interests and pushing against concessions to the Kremlin as the Republican leadership was when Trump was trying inexcusably, terribly, to put pressure on Ukraine, Biden will have no choice. Congress can override him. And so this, again, I'm not predicting this will happen. I'm saying this is a real possibility. There's also, of course, the whole question of what's going on in Germany with the upcoming elections and the strength of the Green Party. But just in a pure Washington context, this thing could still be fixed. And Biden may have no choice but to do the right thing. And again, there are people in the administration who understand this was a terrible mistake. Now, they can't undercut the president, of course not. But there'll be advisors who will say to him, you know, Mr. President, maybe it's time to take a second look at this. And of course, when they faced sharp criticism from the Congress after this terrible mistake, they said, well, we can always change our minds, depending upon circumstances.
You said
circumstances do not look good for the administration.
It's very interesting, but you said that the administration is unlikely to gain anything from Germany, but how about from Russia? I mean, you know, clearly these concessions are ultimately aimed at Russia. And
Mr. Putin is having a great time right now. As soon as the deal was made, as soon as we gave this great concession to Merkel and to Putin, he began to talk about, of course, Russia will send gas through Ukraine if Ukraine behaves itself. In other words, he was saying, we're not sending gas to Ukraine. And I can get away with because these idiots in the West have given me this great concession. You know, it's just incredible. A friend of mine who's got a good sense of humor said Germany's for Nord Stream 2 because they couldn't get it on the Budapest Memorandum. They want to do their own damage to Ukraine. I think that's a little bit cruel, but I understand the point of view.
Yes, it is cruel. Andreas, what's the view from Berlin? How do you see Ambassador Herbst's remarks regarding Germany and the fact that Germany is not minded to give anything or to make any concessions or indeed offer anything to the US and to Ukraine in the future as a result of Nord Stream 2? What do you think?
Well, I would even put it in slightly starker terms, because these plans concerning green energy and hydrogen and biogas and whatnot, this can all be implemented without Nord Stream 2 and with the current Ukrainian gas transportation system being used as before. These are all good plans, but the Nord Stream 2, like with Nord Stream 1, as you mentioned in the beginning, and with Turkstream, it's pretty much a zero-sum situation. It's simply the gas that will go through Nord Stream 2 will not go through Ukraine, and there's now overcapacity anyway in Ukraine, and that could be used for all sorts of green projects if you want to do it. But I'm afraid that that Germany will, even if it makes such proposals, it will not, at this situation, probably not be by itself persuaded to change course. I'm even doubtful that if the Green Party enters in autumn the government, that this will actually be sufficient already to make the new government change course, because they are apparently not getting the chancellorship, and so it's going to be a CDU chancellor, most likely Armin Laschet, and I'm not sure that the Green Party will have, if it is in the government, and that looks likely now that it will be in the government, that it will have enough weight. And there are just a number of factors that determine that there is the regional factor. There is simply East German land states, especially Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in Northeast Germany, that is winning from this project. This is investment, tax money coming in, labor, and so on. And they don't have any interest in geopolitics and Ukraine and so on. There's the energy lobby, and there's now also a large discussion in Berlin about recourse claims if Nord Stream 2 does not go online, and that allegedly Germany and the German taxpayers would have to pay billions and billions to Gazprom, allegedly, because this project was not implemented. And we are now at a situation, I think, where Germany is, where it's a bit too late. I suspect there are now probably many people in Berlin who regret having started this project in 2015 and who would now like to go back, but now that much money has been invested, and also so much political capital has been invested in that it's not easy to step back from that. Although I do hope, as John indicated, that perhaps the elections will change the mood here and we may have a new constellation, but I'm skeptical. The Green Party does not seem to be as strong as it looked like two months ago. And now it looks pretty likely that the new chancellor again will be from the CDU, will be Armin Laschet, and the Green Party is likely to be a partner in the next government, but only a junior partner. It may not even get the foreign ministry if it enters government, and then it would have not much influence on these issues.
That's very interesting. And before I move on to ask more technical questions to Olga and the plan B for Ukraine and for the GTSO, I would like to stay on a little bit with you and discuss with you the snapbacks that have been mooted, or that have been discussed a bit, and possible negotiations between Germany and the US, and what can previous experience inform us, tell us, previous experience of Germany negotiating with Russia over Nord Stream 1, and even the 1970s, in the 1970s, when Germany was very keen on interdependence and had this theory that interdependence will not bring any conflict. And maybe you can put the current situation in the wider historical background, if possible, Andreas, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's just bizarre because we have already twice, it's like a Groundhog Day. We had this already, the situation in the 1970s, the so-called Röhrenkredit I, the Tube Credit 1 of 1970. And then you had 9 years after signing, this was the largest German-Soviet financial deal in history in 1970. 9 years later, Moscow invades Afghanistan. Then we had in 2005, the Nord Stream 1 deal. 9 years later, Moscow invades Ukraine. And now, I would say, in 2015, we had Nord Stream 2 plus 9, that would make the next invasion in 2024. Just from, if you look, but it's indeed a sad story that unfortunately Germany has not learned much from history here. And there's still this mythology around the so-called new Ostpolitik, the new Eastern policy of the 1970s that brought detente. And supposedly these gas deals with the Soviet Union were then part of the detente. What is often forgotten is that after the detente, then there was a huge escalation again of tensions in the East-West conflict. And also that during detente, actually the Soviet Union was preparing for escalation. It was planning and developing and starting to station the infamous SS-20 middle range missiles in Europe, thereby introducing an entirely new new aspect, and also after the Nord Stream 2 deal, that was actually then, once this was completed, there was an escalation, and there was also a planning of escalation. And this whole interdependence theory is simply not working, at least not in the way that Germany is proclaiming it. It actually does work in a very strange way, in that the lowering of, for Ukraine at least, that stronger interdependence between Europe, between the European Union and Russia, has lowered economic interdependence between Ukraine and Russia. And so the approximation through interconnection has here played a sort of had a reverse effect for the Russian-Ukrainian relations, and one could build an entire theory about the peacefulness of the post-Soviet development of Ukraine until 2014, in contrast to such countries as Moldova, Georgia, even Azerbaijan could be mentioned here. These were other gray zone countries that did not have the luxury of having economic leverage against Russia, and therefore became failed states already earlier. And once the economic leverage was lowered with the completion of Nord Stream 1 in October 2012, then the tensions between Russia and Ukraine were rising, and they were already rising under Yanukovych, and they were already rising before the Euromaidan. So this is, people often forget this, that there was already trade war in 2013, before the Euromaidan, and before it was conceivable that Yanukovych would be leaving Ukraine. So this is all a very, very sad story, and unfortunately, the Berlin political elite has not yet drawn the right lessons from that.
Oh, thank you, Andrea. So we'll get back to Ambassador Herbst on this, and why foreign policy makers do not seem to remember the experience of the past. But before I go to you, Ambassador, I need to talk to Olga, because what's really important here is to know what will be the future of Ukraine, particularly once it loses the transit. We've seen that Ukraine has made tremendous efforts to liberalize its markets. And last year it was the star of the show, so to speak, when so many companies started to inject gas in Ukrainian storages. And but with the loss of transit, much of this could be lost as well, because reverse flows may not be possible with the loss of transit. And also it is questionable where Ukraine will be getting the gas itself. Will that increase the vulnerability of Ukraine and its dependence on Russian gas? So Olga, if you could please, I left you a little bit to the end, but with purpose, because obviously the GTSO here is really important, and your view and your perspective will be highly appreciated.
Thank you, Aura. I'd like to start by stating that I'm not very comfortable speaking in terms of Nord Stream 2 being done deal. I actually disagree. And I think up to my knowledge, yesterday, there was no expert whatsoever from Russia to Europe by Nord Stream 2. So for me, it's not a done deal until it's operational, until it transports the first cubic meter of gas. And you mentioned the plan B in your question. Let me say that we at GTSOU are committed to plan A, working with diplomats, working with the new administration in US, working with administration in Berlin to convey our message. The Nord Stream 2 is not only a threat to Ukraine, which is, of course, the most vulnerable party. And here I want to agree with Lana that for us, it was always not just a financial matter. It's not about the money for transit. It's more about security. We consider gas transit as a kind of a shield. We gave back in 1994 our nuclear shield, and we are about to lose our gas shield, which is essentially what Russian gas to transit to Europe is for Ukraine, because they depend on us to transport their gas. And even though they prefer not to sell enough of gas to Europe right now, and we will mention it later, they still depend on this route to be safe and secure. So we consider it first and foremost our security issue. But also for Europe, if we look at what Europe has been trying to achieve throughout the last decade, it was liberalized markets. And we are about to approach a moment where most of the gas will be transported by one party via the same route and being coordinated by Kremlin. And I wonder why European politicians are not only learning the lessons, but they are disregarding the current situation. Just in June, on 24th, the Financial Times, the financial magazine, was investigating what is happening with the prices in Europe. If we are to compare to 2008, we see 600% increase in prices right now in Europe. Why is that? The Ukrainian operator is willingly offering all capacities Europe can dream of to fulfill the climate agenda, to fulfill their production needs for industry. But Gazprom is not using our capacities right now, even without Nord Stream 2 in place. Well, my guess is, I don't know what is the logic in Kremlin, but my guess is that they do want to show who is to rule the rules in Europe. And this price is not just a commercial logic. It's a very clear political signal, which was also expressed about Ukraine in his recent press conference. President Putin was very eloquent in explaining how Ukraine should behave so we can get gas afterwards. And I think this is very interesting that right now, it seems like some of the politicians, they are disregarding all these very clear signals. But let me just say, Ukraine will prevail and Ukraine will exist no matter if the gas transit is going through Ukraine or not. Ukraine remains very strong and, very important gas market in Europe. We consume about 30 BCM of gas. We produce 20. The deficit is about 10. Yes, it is a problem for us. We are working on contingency plans and diversification of how to make sure that Ukraine has more choices with or without Nord Stream 2. Irregardless of Nord Stream 2, Ukraine has to diversify its own sources of gas. And for that in mind, we continuously talk to US, our strategic partner, because they have an alternative supply of gas in the form of LNG. For that, we need to develop stronger relationship with Poland, with Romania, with Hungary, with Slovakia. We are in constant talks with these parties. And once again, it's regardless of Nord Stream 2, because we still hope that political elite, specifically in Washington, D.C., will look again at this situation and either will repeal the waiver or will reconsider the current way it was done. I actually don't think it was, I would call it as a political signal which was given to Germany. If Germany is not using it the right way, I actually think that the Biden administration has all the rights to overrule its own decision and reconsider it. I think I've managed to respond to your question. If I may add just one point, I think it is important to remember that here we in Ukraine, and you don't know, I have a political career previously. I would say that me and Lana, we were fighting so much for unbundling, for the liberalized market reform. It was one of the most difficult reforms for whole Ukraine. And I have to say, as a former politician, I find it very disappointing to see how politicians in EU are not willing to voice their concerns and to demand from Russia to do the same, whether it's coming to using Ukrainian GTSO route for Asian gas or unblocking some of the deals in Europe. This is not about Ukraine anymore. This is about European consumers. And I wonder why European voters are not asking German politicians about the gas prices right now in Europe. How does it make any sense right now not to engage into talks and to demand that liberal kind of rules are applied to all the conditions on gas market? Thank you so much.
No, I am familiar with your uphill struggle to liberalize the market, and having covered illiquid, non-liberal markets for 12 years, I know how difficult it is, and I know how difficult it was for you. But before I go to Ambassador Herbst, Ambassador, while we're on the subject, I would like to ask Lana to tell us, because Olga mentioned the alternatives, and I know that a couple of scenarios have been discussed, including, for example, the suing of Gazprom for blocking the route, and also opening up the transit to Central Asian producers, and also the possibility of maybe selling stakes in the Ukrainian TSO to Western partners. How serious are these, and how feasible are these projects or scenarios? What do you think, Lana?
I think that, first of all, it is a very good now moment for the political pressure, because the issue of opening of Russian markets lays in one hand. This is a kind of possibility which exists in the legal sphere, and it will not require years and years in the court procedure. It will require common position of European and American leaders concerning the necessity to unblock the market for different kind of players in Russia, and actually to stop using gas as a tool and as a weapon. So that means that Russians will just need to change one law. That's it. For the suing Russia, we can spend years in court, and we will hear definitely that while you are in the court, we can't do anything. That happened before, and we know how it works in the European Union. They will explain to Americans and to us that they can't do nothing particularly because we are in court. That's why I am not in favor of this kind of way forward. I do prefer to solve the issue this year, which will give us more comfort and also more comfort for Europe, where now it is only 48.5% of fulfillment of underground storages, which is much less than the usual amount in this time of the year. And if this situation will continue till the end of the year, they will be able to pump in the underground storages around 70%, which is 20% less than usual. So they will start winter with a much lower amount of gas in the underground storages, which with uncertain situation concerning the Ukrainian transit, because we don't have any particular data concerning the plans of Gazprom for booking capacities, and with a clear threat for the cold winter in Europe. So Russia actually now created all perfect conditions for the blackmailing Europe. And I still can't understand how they don't see the actual conditions which shows us with our experience that the usual behavior of Russia will continue and that they will use this situation in their favor. So this is short signing concerning the development of the situation is very strange for me. As for the use of Ukrainian gas transportation system, I was always in favor of the creation of consortium with the participation of the European companies, which can give more comfort for the Europe and also more certainty for us, because in that conditions, it will not be only the Ukrainian problem with interruption of the transit. It will be also a problem for the European Union, and we will have more rights to sue Russia concerning any kind of break of treaties or agreements. But at the same time, I do think that it's also connected to the necessity to operate in the common legal framework. And if Ukraine already implemented majority of the European rules and created a liquid market in Ukraine and transparent market, we still hope that Russia can do the same. And that will create more peaceful situation and more confident situation within whole Europe, including Ukraine.
Thank you, Lana. That was a comprehensive answer. Ambassador Herbst, I had a question before, and I was going to ask you because Andreas has told us about the experiences of the past. So why haven't foreign policy makers learned from this past experiences? And the second question that I have was actually about Ukraine itself, because Ukraine, as Lana and Olga were explaining, has made tremendous efforts to liberalize the markets and also to implement corporate governance standards. But recently we've seen a decline in these standards, and we saw the struggle at Naftogaz and the fact that the supervisory board was dismissed and then reinstated. The CEO was dismissed. So really not very much in line with corporate standards, governance standards. So going forward, first question, Ambassador, to recap, why haven't foreign policy makers learned from the past? And number two, what will be the future of Ukraine if these standards that are so crucial to Ukraine are declining?
I don't think it's fair to say that no statesman learned from the past. Some do, some don't. And we talk about the specific issue of the Washington error on Nord Stream 2. Clearly, in this administration, some people understood that that was a mistake, but they lost the policy debate. I would make there is a pattern when you have new administrations taking office in Washington that they want to disassociate themselves from their predecessor. And that tendency, which is true with all administrations, even when a Republican replaces a Republican or a Democrat, that tendency is much stronger this time because the Trump administration was so peculiar. And Biden wanted to make clear that he was very, very different from Trump. And since Trump was a big critic of Nord Stream 2 and an unnecessary antagonist, a foolish antagonist of Merkel, Biden wanted to stress that he was quite different. I think Biden was right to want to make that, to stress that difference. He just did it the wrong way. And I think, again, we may yet see him understand that and take the sensible decision to restore sanctions. Again, we'll see. Regarding your second question, corporate governance is part of being a modern, transparent, non-corrupt economy. Ukraine, unfortunately, is not a modern, transparent, non-corrupt economy. And I dare say that the leadership of the country doesn't really understand how important these principles, transparency, are to the abolition of corruption. We know that President Zelensky and his closest advisors were not fond of Mr. Kobalyev when he was head of Naftahaz. Kobalyev did a great job, and his departure is unfortunate, but not necessarily a tragedy as long as his replacement is adequate or good. And there's no question that the two people who deserve the most credit for the reforms in natural gas sector of Ukraine were Kobalyev and Vitrenko. They worked together very closely in 2014 and 15 and 16, then they fell out. So from the standpoint of intelligent gas policy in Ukraine, I don't think replacing Kobalyev with Vitrenko is a mistake. As long as Vitrenko continues to pursue the right policies. But again, he did that earlier in his career. I thought that an understanding had been reached when Secretary of State Blinken visited Ukraine a couple of months ago on this issue, which was that, okay, Kobalyev was going to leave, Vitrenko was going to come in at least temporarily. And yes, Zelensky understood the corporate boards need to be important for Naftahaz and more broadly. Now it's not certain that that understanding has remained in place. We've seen the current head of the board sharply critical of Vitrenko, insisting he cannot be in that position. We seem to see support from the United States. I say seem to see because it's not fully clear for the current board as constituted. To me, there is a compromise to be had. I thought it had been reached before. It may yet be reached, but we just don't know. But let me stress two things as I say all this. Again, you need to have a serious, competent reformer in charge of Naftahaz. Kobalyev was that. Vitrenko could be that, I believe. And you have to have a recognition by the authorities in Ukraine that corporate boards play a critical and independent role. I think that Zelensky had agreed to that in connection with Naftahaz, but well, I guess this remains to be seen.
Well, clearly the solidity of institutions is critical in Ukraine, and that they will be tasked to carry forward this reform, this tremendous reform that is needed in the Ukraine. And if the institutions are not solid enough, then that will put into question the whole reform process. But before I go to questions from the audience, I have one more question for Andreas. And Andreas, you've probably heard that Lana was discussing the possibility of Western European companies taking a stake in the TSO. How possible? How interesting would that be for Western European companies? And going forward, how do you see the relationship between Western European countries and the Eastern European countries unfolding? Because that whole European edifice seems to be shaking now, especially, and as I said in my introductory statement, this division between the West and the East seems to be coming out into bold relief. So first question about the about buying stakes in the TSO. And then second question about the division between Western countries and Eastern countries.
Yes, there was already this project about, I think, 20 years ago to have a consortium that would include Germany or the EU, Ukraine and Russia, and then do something about the Ukrainian gas transportation system. And there is maybe Lana and Olga can say something on this. There's a debate now, a sort of historic debate on who is to blame that these negotiations back then, I think that was still under Kuchma, that they did not materialize. So today, I think that is obviously something that Ukraine very much wants, Western engagement, investment also, and also this would be another sort of layer of security that Ukraine could get. But I'm not enough of an energy expert really to say something on that. About this East-West divide, this is something that is now also being more and more, I would say, fortunately discussed in Germany. It's also, I think, weakening the German arguments and the not only Putin versteher and Russia understanders and these sort of apologists of Russian foreign policies, but also there's the centrist part, I would say, of the political spectrum that is now having its second thoughts in view of this East European stance, and that's why I'm also, as Olga, still optimistic. I'm not sure whether John and Lana would and Laura, you would join me in this, that if I look out and the overall political situation and the correlation of forces, as a Soviet propagandist would say, then I think it's still in favor of this project not being implemented, because we have forces in the US, on the European level, and even within Germany that are against this, and that is now becoming a larger and larger coalition, I would say. For instance, with the Green parties taking such a principled stance on it, and on the whole, and also the East European countries, the member countries, I mean, of the EU, they are playing a key role here. Poland, the Baltic countries, and that makes me still optimistic, and I still hope that this project is never going to go online, or at least is not going to go online until a significant improvement in the Russian-Ukrainian relations, which I think would actually only be possible after some sort of change in the presidential office or even of the regime in Russia.
Mm. Well, that's very interesting, because very recently one of the think tanks here in the UK was pointing out, especially in the light of Nord Stream 2 and also the efforts by President Macron and Chancellor Merkel to call a summit with President Putin. He was actually, this think tank was saying, well, actually this brings into the foreground the fact that in Eastern Europe we have Russia realists, people who actually understand what Russia really is, and in the West, Russian idealists who don't have first-hand experience of Russia, and maybe that's why I'm more prone to calling for a rapprochement, or maybe even making some policy mistakes. But we have a couple of points that were raised by our panel, and I will read some of them. I think there are some questions as well, so bear with me. There's quite a long comment here. Essentially, someone was saying that Russia has already uncoupled itself or disentangled itself from countries such as Ukraine, Belarus, or Poland. So these, our listener was saying, these legacy Soviet transit states, and none of these legacy transit states is a strategic danger to Russia. Putin, essentially, the listener says, has won without even Nord Stream 2 in service. No expert or official is worried about a gas crisis in Europe when Putin put 100,000 troops on Ukraine's border. So he is saying that Ukraine is expendable to Russia, and nobody cares about, Russia doesn't care about Ukraine. And probably the implication is that neither does the US, EU, and NATO. What do you have to say? Does anyone want to take this question? Is Ukraine expendable to Russia as well as to Europe and the US?
Well, I'll take a shot at it. I think that the questioner is actually quite wrong. If Ukraine were quote unquote expendable to Russia, you would not have Russian troops fighting in Donbass to persuade Kyiv to pursue a pro-Russian foreign policy. And in fact, the whole crisis in Russia's relationship with the West is precisely a result of Russia's refusal to let Ukraine pursue its own policies, both domestic and foreign. That's what this is all about. Now, I think it's true that for some statespeople, I should say as politicians, not statesmen or women, for some politicians in Western Europe, they wish Ukraine would go away, and they'd be happy to let Russia do whatever it wants in Ukraine if it was up to them. That's certainly not the view in Eastern Europe. It's certainly not the view in Washington. And it's certainly not the view in I'd say, even most countries in Western Europe. There may be some people in those countries, not the countries themselves. And while I am sharply critical of Germany over Nord Stream 2, you have to credit Merkel for doing a very good job in keeping the EU in line on sanctions on Russia for its war in Ukraine. So the task is to make sure that the West, as a collection, as a group, puts back substantial pressure, enough pressure on Moscow to force it to stand down in Ukraine. So far, the amount of pressure we put is adequate. We have stopped Kremlin from achieving its objectives, but we have not stopped the Kremlin from continuing its war in Donbass. And I would like to see an increase in pressure to do that. And here, Nord Stream 2 is just a disaster. Because again, it provides a new source of pressure and revenue for Putin, which he does not have at the present time. And why we want to do that at this point in time, we just don't. It's just a huge mistake.
Question actually was from Dr. Tom O'Donnell, and he was saying that, so continuing his remarks, his earlier remarks, saying that the coupling was precisely the German geostrategy in assisting construction of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And the German reason is also to de-link the security of its market from the Russian gas supplies. Russia does it for its own obvious reasons. What do you think, Andreas? I mean, how do you reply to this point raised by Dr. O'Donnell that this was actually a deliberate German decoupling from geostrategy? Do you see it as a decoupling from geostrategy, or we should read there should be finer details here that we should look into?
I'm not sure I quite got the question. I see also Olga, but as I said before, I think there is just a non-recognition of these strategic implications, and there is a sort of a parallel world that has emerged, I would say, in the 1970s, with the myth that allegedly the détente policies of then the new Ostpolitik has somehow prepared glasnost, perestroika, and the end of the Cold War, when in fact we had between these policies and the end of the Cold War, perhaps one of the most dangerous periods in European history in the early 1980s. And there was this incident, I believe in 1983, when a low-ranking Soviet officer basically saved apparently the world from World War II, because he recognized that there may have been a technical mistake that was putting the Soviet armed forces on alert. And we had the Afghanistan and the SS-20 missiles and the events in Poland and so on. And so this is somehow not recognized, and the same mistakes are now made again. And now we are in the third round of this misinterpretations of the geostrategic aspects of these gas deals.
Yes, Olga, you wanted to point something out. You wanted to comment.
Yes, so I'm not sure I understood the question as well, but I am assuming that that the question was that Ukraine is not so meaningful in the eyes of German or Russian politicians. So let me start by saying that for somebody who is not interested in Ukraine, I think the president of Russia is, speaking about Ukraine in each and every press conference. I think it's very hard to believe that they don't think that Ukraine is so strategic. So I totally agree with Ambassador Herbst here. It is extremely important for Russia, in my view, politically, to make sure that Ukraine becomes irrelevant to EU gas market. And they, for that reason, they do spend billions of Russian money, and it's not European money. We know all of us, we know that they were using Russian money to build the pipeline. So they do it because there is a political goal. That's why so many politicians in Germany and in Russia, they are defending the idea of this pipeline, even though they started by saying that this is purely commercial matter. This is not, and even Chancellor Merkel, she admitted she understands the geopolitical essence of it. If we look, but let's assume German politicians and Russian politicians should care about their own interests. Once again, I'm asking why European politicians are not seeing huge trouble coming up to them and their voters if we look at gas prices right now. It is very obvious that Russian gas is coming with pressure, not only to Ukraine, but to European markets. And finally, if we look at the numbers for Germany, I actually find it very fascinating. Does Germany need so much natural gas? Is it the most vulnerable country in terms of gas supply to Europe? So now Germany will be the country which receives most of gas coming to Europe only to redistribute to those who live nearby, specifically Central and Eastern Europe. So of course, us Polish, Slovaks, and others who still depend on gas because of our economy and because of the climate conditions. And here again, I think it is important to remind everybody here that for Germany, it is an issue of industry. For Ukraine, it's an issue of being warm in winter, because we actually need gas for our social needs as well. So if you put all these arguments in one place, I think politicians should be very serious not to make the final step before the cliff, because everybody thinks, and actually I see a lot of efforts by Russia to present the deal as a done deal right now. So everybody thinks there is nothing we can do right now. But once again, I'm positive there are still some ways to change the situation and to make sure that either Ukraine remain relevant and of interest to Europe. And here, I actually think that the idea of consortium is important for Europe equally as for Ukraine, because Ukraine has a lot to offer. We have unique TSO system, we have unique system of pipelines, even compared to under the sea system, we are more reliable, we are more secure. If anything happens, we can switch quickly between different pipelines. What will happen in July when Nord Stream 2 and Yamal will be on maintenance? Well, I guess we will see another hike of prices on the market. Who knows? But I think Europe has to, people in Brussels, in DC, in Berlin, they have a final chance to talk to President Zelensky. And we think it is important that Ukraine is included into discussion between Berlin and Washington, DC. This is about Ukrainian interests as well. So there should be, Ukrainian points taken into consideration. We are very constructive. Aura, you know better than anybody else. There were no complaints about Ukrainian TSO operating even from Gazprom. They never send you any complaints about our behavior. So now we are trustworthy. European rules work in Ukraine. There is not a point to say that Ukraine is too risky. It's not, unless there is more aggression from Russia.
Yes, Lana, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just want to elaborate a little bit the point concerning consortium, because it's not only a matter of the long past, as Andres referred it to the time of Kuchma, but we had a lot of common work with European companies during 2019 before the final constellation of unbundling was approved by our parliament. Unfortunately, our parliament decided not in favor of possibility to create consortium, and it was Yulia Tymoshenko who was actually against any kind of move without the property on our gas transportation system. She wanted it to remain in the state property, and that's it. But now we have an absolutely different situation, and I think that the support for the idea of creation of consortium with the participation of European companies now is much higher than even in 2019. Definitely for us, it will be a way forward, but also it will be a way forward for Europe, because we do have a very well-developed gas transportation system, and we can divide it for the internal needs and for the external transportation. That's why we think that it can be a way forward in any circumstances. And I still hope, actually, together with Olga and others, that Nord Stream 2 is not a done deal. But at the same time, I still consider the necessity to think about the development of Ukrainian security, and first of all, energy security. And consortium is one of the key points in this respect.
Thank you, Lana. Actually, the listener who was asking the first question has clarified his point, and he said that the point is that Putin has succeeded in decoupling risk to European gas business from military subversion that he tries to undertake in order to incorporate Ukraine. So gas no longer serves his military subversion tactics. So yes, Andreas, if you could address these points, please. You've raised your hand.
Yeah, I'm grateful for Tom O'Donnell, who is of course a major energy expert, American, I believe, who lives in and teaches in Berlin, for pointing this out. And the paradox of this is that is exactly you know, the theory and the philosophy on which the arguments in favor of Nord Stream 2 are made, because it's just the reverse argument. It's that we Germans need these connections to Russia because that makes us more secure, you know. And as Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the federal president, said, you know, this is a sort of bridge to Russia, Nord Stream 2. But the problem is, of course, that we are building this bridge and we are destroying another bridge, namely the Russian-Ukrainian bridge. So, you know, if you want to be, you know, serious about the metaphors you're going to use, you know, and you want to be serious about the theories and the whole approach that you use, the interdependence theory, that if interdependence theory works for Germany, it also works for Ukraine. It has worked very well till the end of 2012, till Nord Stream 1 went into business. It saved Ukraine from the same fate as Moldova and Georgia had. And there were already in the 1990s many politicians in Russia who were not happy about Sevastopol being a Ukrainian city and about Crimea being Ukrainian and many parts of mainland eastern and southern Ukraine being parts of Ukraine. But no war happened, and you know, and yes, that's why it doesn't happen, because there was interdependence between Russia and Ukraine, or more correctly, there was dependence of Russia on the Ukrainian gas transportation system. And we Germans have, with our interdependence theory-based approach, destroyed this interdependence, and we have therefore given Russia a free hand vis-a-vis Ukraine.
Building bridges at the expense of burning other bridges, other people's bridges, right? Ambassador Herbst, we were talking here grand strategy, and I would like you perhaps to comment a little bit on the future of Eastern Europe. And the biggest fear for us in Eastern Europe is whether all these unfolding relations will leave us into a new Russian sphere of influence. And what can maybe Nord Stream 2 tell us? What lessons can we learn from all these discussions about Nord Stream, and what implications what conclusions can we draw for Eastern Europe, and particularly going forward, US Eastern European relations?
Look, if Nord Stream 2 is completed and becomes operational, and again, that's a hypothetical. We don't know if it'll happen. If it's true, it will strengthen ties between German business interests in Russia. And that is very bad for the countries of Eastern Europe. Historically, when Moscow and Berlin get together, it is not good for stability in Europe, and especially for the countries in between. But I don't want to overstate that, because, again, Merkel on the one hand has been pushing for Nord Stream 2. On the other, she's been pushing hard against Kremlin aggression in Ukraine. And I believe that will persist even if Nord Stream 2 continues. But it will strengthen the hand of Putin apologists in Germany. And that's a bad thing, because the Putin verstehers have a great ability to see no Kremlin aggression, where Kremlin soldiers are fighting against small countries and demanding that they submit to Kremlin diktat. So that's a bad thing. But again, even if this becomes operational, I believe, and Andreas can speak to this, I think, with greater expertise, that the German orientation in support of the countries of Eastern Europe having the right to pursue their own policies will remain. And of course, the American commitment will remain. But having said all that, I think Nord Stream 2 has a precarious future, and our job is to make it as precarious as possible.
Thank you, Ambassador. A slightly more practical question for Olga and for Lana. We in the gas business, we also look at what's been happening with reverse flow. So essentially, gas that is transiting Ukraine right now is being reversed back into Ukraine, and some of this gas has even gone into storage. Last year, as I said, Ukraine had a bumper year. What will happen going forward if there is no transit through Ukraine? Will there be any gas coming back into Ukraine? And if there is no gas coming back into Ukraine, because everything will be controlled from Germany, and the gas, as I said, will go through UGAL, where will Ukraine be getting its gas from? Will it have to go back to Russia and ask for Russian gas? Can you explain what will happen? I'm assuming a plan B, which I appreciate you don't want to accept, quite rightfully, but maybe you could address this question.
Yeah, but definitely it's not only about plan B, because the interruption of transit can happen even without Nord Stream 2. We are always under threat of such an interruption. So that's why we now have to think about the possibilities and to modify situation in order to be sure that we will be able to survive in any circumstances. For us, we definitely now enjoy the possibilities of virtual rivers. And last year showed that we definitely became a very reliant partner, and we stored in our underground storages a lot of gas from Europe, from non-residents, and they enjoy good conditions, which are very convenient for them. However, we have a limitation on the physical rivers, and you know pretty well that interconnectors in our border with the EU countries are limited in their capacities. So we have to prepare ourselves for the winter. And now Naftogaz increases pumping into the underground storages and eager to create around 19.5 BCM till the end of pumping season. So that is our plan. And we hope that this winter will not create any crisis, not for us, not for European Union. But we see that Russia still plays its favorite game. And they still have in mind the creation of the crisis as a kind of pressure point on Europe, first of all, and pressure point for the Nord Stream 2 completion. That's obvious.
I know that this discussion is largely about Nord Stream. We haven't touched at all on the other Russian pipeline, Turkstream, which has diverted 15 billion cubic meters of gas, quite a lot of gas from Ukraine. And Moldova was importing gas via this pipeline via Ukraine. But going forward, it seems that some of the gas will now come from the south, so from Turkstream. From your point of view, Olga, what should be done to actually maybe try to keep alive that Trans-Balkan route? Is there a chance at all? There have been some talks about maybe getting some LNG from Turkey, but having covered Turkey for so many years, I know that it's not that easy. What sort of discussions do you have at the GTSO regarding that eastern route and transit through that eastern route? Is it still possible, or is it gone now, completely idle?
Okay, yeah, you are absolutely right in terms of the negative impact of Turkstream 1 on the Ukrainian volumes being transported via our capacities. The whole route right now is available, the Trans-Balkan route is available, but economically not viable. There was a point when one Ukrainian company tried to arrange import of gas coming from Greece to Ukraine. It was an experience for the sake of kind of testing this opportunity. And we found out that using the Trans-Balkan route in reverse flow is physically possible. However, because of some rules being implied in Romania, in Moldova specifically, their tariff make it not very attractive for any commercial use. At Ukrainian TSO, we are very aware of potential risks. Back to your previous question, we are very aware of security risks for Ukraine in terms of supply of gas. And as I mentioned before, the 10 BCM of gas, more or less, 10 BCM, because Ukraine has done actually a tremendous job of being efficient in use of gas over the last 10 years. And actually, this is one of the positive implications of our let's say, difficulties in relationship with Russia. Back in 2014, when we saw the first signals of aggression from Russia, we decided not to buy gas from Russia. And within the next 2 years, Naftogaz saw a decrease of demand on the side of population for their consumption of gas, 20%. And that was just behavioral change. So I do think it's one of the sources of diversification for my own country to decrease consumption of gas and to limit it to the volumes we produce ourselves. At the very same time, I, as somebody who was working on increase of domestic production of gas, I think it is of crucial importance to continue this dialogue with private business and with state-owned companies, that we increase our own production. Unlike Germany, unlike other European countries, we still can do this. This is not like a wishful thinking. We do have reserves. We have capacity of increasing our own production. LNG comes, every day Gazprom is keeping high price. This is like a positive signal to LNG capacities. Yes, Turkey is a complex country in diplomacy. However, we see some signals that it could be different. If we may actually see some changes in terms of our ability to agree with Turkish leadership on LNG terminal. But it's not the only LNG possibility. Poland is on the way, you know, and is an option if Poland, us, and US will find a creative way to agree on how to use Ukrainian storages, you know, as a backup system for LNG supply to Europe. We also are interested in Kirk terminal. So there are a variety of plans. We call them contingency plans, with or without Nord Stream 2, irregardless, because we think this is the right way for Ukraine to include this into our consideration. And finally, Ukrainian TSO is going through reimagining itself. It was built as a system to transport Russian gas for European needs. Right now, if there will be less of transit coming via Ukrainian route, we will have to redesign the system for the purpose of serving mainly Ukrainian consumers. We will take it into consideration. We will modernize the system so it has all the capacities being focused on internal market. But we also see some opportunities in hydrogen. There are plenty of discussions about that. We also see potential with biogas, and Ukrainian parliament right now is working on some options how to include it into our future. So I'm not saying I am overly optimistic. I guess it's my political past speaking in me. I have to inspire along with scaring audience. But I'd say people in Ukraine are not like oblivious that we need to work on our homework. We understand what we have to do. We only hope that there will be more mutual interest between Europe and Ukraine, and Europe will see that Ukraine was very prudent in delivering our promises under all the international agreements. We has never interrupted our transit because of us. It was never us. Technically, we disregarded our own needs, but we transported gas from Russia to Europe. And we do hope that right now is the right moment for all of us to understand that contingency plans and plans B will be relevant for all Europe, not only for Ukraine.
Thank you, Olga. And Andreas, you wanted to add something?
As Olga mentioned LNG already, and there's now also a question about LNG in the chat section. I forgot something to mention when I talked about the German discourse, and that is the very popular idea that the US stance against Nord Stream 2 has only to do supposedly with the US interest in selling LNG to Europe, and this is all about competition. So there's a lot of anti-Americanism here going on that even is, to me, to a certain degree, similar to anti-Semitism, that you cannot believe in the sort of idealistic and political ideological argument what is behind always with the Americans. Whatever they do around the world, it's their own business that they only care about. But I think I saw a table, was it for 2020 or 2019, of the 10 largest LNG exporters of the world, and the US was not among them. Russia was among the 10 largest LNG exporters. This may also, change from year to year, but that is a very popular argument. I think you would hear it in almost any German discussion about Nord Stream 2, that the Americans are just pushing here allegedly their own business interests.
course, anyone who has the faintest idea about markets would know that America would send on price, would sell energy on price, LNG on price, and not on politics. And we've seen that time and again. But Ambassador, we've got 1 more minute, and I would like you to I would like this discussion to finish with your remarks. And Andreas has raised something extremely important, which I find in Western Europe, living here, that there is quite an undercurrent of anti-Americanism in Western Europe, particularly Germany and France. What does America do about that? Because to my mind, this is actually quite serious to the transatlantic relation.
There's always been a strain of virulent anti-Americanism in Europe, even 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. That's not so new. It is true that we've made some mistakes, which has contributed to that. I mean, certainly Trump's disrespect of the alliance, NATO, Trump's disrespect of the EU contributed to that. And of course, major American foreign policy errors, our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, also contributed to it. Having said that, the prosperity and security of even the anti-Americans Europe depend upon sound American policy. And the sound American policy, which with our partners in Europe, that we pursued since the end of World War II, has created extraordinary prosperity and stability, historically unparalleled. And of course, people who grew up in a world of historic prosperity and stability, take it for granted instead of understanding the reasons for it. But there are smart people in Germany and in France, even in Germany and France, who understand this. I have many friends there, and they understand that close relations between Washington, Berlin, Paris, London, and so on are critical for their own well-being. And I think that this alliance of interests, this alliance of friends, will ultimately manage the problem of short-sighted anti-Americans in Europe, who of course are encouraged and partly empowered by a rather sophisticated, not just Kremlin misinformation operation, but also the use of Kremlin money that hires senior German and Austrian statesmen to become puppets for the Kremlin. But I think that people in Germany and Austria, just to name 2 countries, understand this. And in France too, I'm sorry to say, as I think about one particular conservative French politician who's now big in hydrocarbons.
I think we all know who that is.
Yes.
Thank you, Ambassador Herbst. And I do hope that people in the Biden administration will be smart enough, not only just to erase that anti-Americanism in Western Europe, but also not to create any anti-Americanism in Eastern Europe, the part of the world that really cares a lot about its relationship with the US.
I think Biden's going to be good for that, but although he has to fix this Nord Stream problem.
I hope so too. Ambassador and Lana, Olga, Andreas, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We had a wonderful discussion. I hope our listeners have also enjoyed it. And for those of you who are very keen on webinars and on conferences, the Adam Smith conferences will continue with the Ukrainian Energy Forum to be held between 14th and 16th of July. And of course, we're going to explore these issues in more technical depth, I would say, over the next couple of days next week. So again, from the speakers and from me in London, I would like to thank everyone and to wish you a very nice evening. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.